So I hashtagged this tweet Climate Strike back in March. We only have history recorded by the winners to assess the situation prior to our birth. Prophets of global warming persuade youth by saying they'll pay the cost for our carbon sins when the prophecy is fulfilled. Youth crave agency, but lack wisdom. Convenient. So, once again, we started earlier in this video talking about how the Democrat Party wanted to add 16-year-old voters to the rolls and say, well, you're 16, you can vote. The thing is, though, the Democrat Party also has this thing they like to persuade around called climate change. And they have people all across the world, the UN, all across the world, the globalists. They have Greta Thunberg, and they have other people out there, Michael Mann and all these different people, scientists, advocates. They have dancers in the street. They have academics. Of course, institutions is a modern religion where you have academia, media, and state. And so people in academia, media, and state on the Democrat side are persuading. They've made it a wedge issue. They've made it a dividing line. You're in the world of identity politics once again. You're either a believer, a disciple of the modern religion that is global warming, or you are a climate denier. You are in denial. The truth is so clear, and yet it eludes you. You're denying it. You know it's true. You know it's true. The sky is falling. The seas are rising. Now again, I have a video, Global Warming is a Modern Religion, in which I do talk a little bit more about my perspective when it comes to how to handle energy, how to handle the climate issue, and where I fall in terms of the persuasion on this topic. But again, I have knowledge. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, and I know that there were things such as the ozone layer scare. The ozone layer has a hole in it. And then they said, well, Manhattan's going to be underground. It's going to be underground by the year 2014. And they said so many things that didn't really come true. They said there was a peak oil. There was not going to be any more oil. And then we started fracking, hydraulic fracking. We found more oil. Now, oil doesn't seem to have any problem in terms of abundance. It's almost everywhere. It's in the United States. It's in North America, South America. It's all across the world. In many places, and a lot of different countries continue to use coal and natural gas. Fossil fuels aren't going anywhere. But of course, if you listen to the prophets of the modern religion that is global warming, they will proselytize and say, well, if you don't do something in 8, 9, 10 years, and they'll say, of course, 30 years from now, and 2080, and by 2080 or 2100, the GDP of the United States might be 10% lower, which you wouldn't even notice because it's 10% over time. If you don't have a solid number, it's a moving target. And of course, postmodern ideology is all about moving targets, of course. You don't really know what you have. You just have this sort of faith that, my God, if we don't do something, I might be a bad person. I might have made a mistake. I might not have merit. This might be just a flawed decision if I don't do something. If I don't start eating bugs, or stop having children, or stop eating meat in general because cows produce methane. And CO2, carbon dioxide, is a pollutant. Doesn't green the earth. Plants don't eat it for food. There's so many different ways you can look at this situation and say, well, hold on. You're only telling me about the costs. You're not referring to the benefits of the situation. You're not explaining clearly. Now, it is on the alarmists, on the climate alarmists, to persuade me to them, because they're taking a position on something. Like I say, for example, as an agnostic, to climate change. And again, I understand that the oceans may be rising or falling, or the temperature may be rising or falling. There may be global warming or global cooling. On a long enough time scale or timeline, you could make all kinds of statements that are objectively or subjectively true. And it's like the modern religion of statistics as well. It's all very confusing because you can frame things in a way that makes them true or untrue depending on how you look at it, how long of a time scale you're looking at, and what the targets are. And if you point to specific, you appeal to anecdote and make specific anecdotal references to different specific parts of the world. I mean, generally speaking, I am agnostic on it. I am open to it. I'm constantly reading about this issue. And what I've found is that even if global warming were an issue, which it doesn't appear to be, we can't upend the world economy. We can't enforce like a zero carbon emission standard in this world because, we could do it. We could be like Juul with the vaping and take the flavors off the market. We could give ourselves a bit of a handicap to other countries we are competitive with, other continents, China, for instance. We could make ourselves less competitive with Russia by making ourselves force ourselves to use fuel sources that are not efficient or that, don't allow us to have enough power to continue the industry as we have since the Industrial Revolution. There are so many ways that this idea of climate change can disrupt the world economy. You can make the judgment for yourself how you feel, but in my world I persuade towards nuclear energy and cleaner forms of fossil fuel, trying to refine those processes. In the context of nuclear, I say we should look towards Generation 3 and Generation 4 nuclear power because it does not melt down and it uses recyclable nuclear waste for fuel with yields as high as 90%. Go follow Sub Schneider on Twitter, Mark Schneider, who is an advocate for Generation 4 nuclear power, which is growing in popularity because it is not only efficient, but it is also, I believe, carbon neutral, or does not have carbon emissions. So if you have carbon guilt, and I have a video, Carbon Guilt, check it out, nuclear power could be the solution you're looking for. Because solar is great, and things like wind are cool, but they're also rather inefficient, and they have their own costs and benefits. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't see oil going anywhere anytime soon, but nuclear, for some of those larger applications, taking care of cities and towns, could be a great solution. And of course, they do have something called carbon capture, which you can actually put a carbon capture station next to your nuclear power plant, Generation 3 or 4, that's safer, and you won't have any of those Chernobyl kind of situations. Chernobyl could be viewed as climate propaganda, by the way, if you'd like. And that way you're taking in the carbon from the air and using it and finding good applications for it that do not, if you believe in carbon polluting, pollute the environment. So, prophets of global warming persuade youth who haven't seen the past. They only know stories. They only know history, which is written by the winners, the people that have the power to put forth information, to create media that is viewed decades or even centuries later. And if you go centuries back on climate news, global warming, global cooling news, you will start to see why I'm a bit more agnostic. Definitely check out Tony Heller. He is a well-known climate skeptic. And of course, there are other websites, many, many others. Just put climate change into Google and you can find more information if you're a climate alarmist and you'd like to persuade in that direction. So these prophets persuade youth by saying they'll pay the cost. You'll pay the cost for our carbon sins 50 or 60 years from now, when the prophecy is fulfilled. So they say the modern religions, they do require, whether you're secular or non-secular, maybe even devoutly secular, they do require a bit of faith over reason. So they need you to look towards the future that you can't see. The past does not determine the future. can't see the future, but you can just look at all the information that has happened before and make a determination of what's going to happen next. And of course, we have these models and these systems for determining what's going to happen with the climate. We have the Russian model, I believe it's called, I'm going to get this wrong, but you can look it up, INCM4 and 5. I might have had that wrong, but you can certainly look up Russian climate model and you will quickly come across the INCM4 and 5 that have predicted largely, predictably, accurately, what has been going on in terms of temperature and climate. But a number of these models have a lot of different calculations and people putting offsets in and doing all this stuff that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to reflect reality. It just, it accounts for certain things here. And really, I see the climate, I think it's a bit of an ego thing for us to think that we can control the climate. It's one of our great white whales that we can control the climate. And for me, I don't think we have enough information. There's underground volcanoes that might have warmed the water here and not warmed it there. There's so many different considerations and factors that go into all these things. But of course, there is this overarching altruistic lens. Of course, moral virtue and universal truth are at stake here, right? So you have this idea, this sort of advocacy to say, well, maybe global warming or global cooling, climate change might not really be, in actuality, the biggest issue on the table. There might be other things out there, but we do want to persuade in an anti-pollution direction, and that is virtuous in my mind. So it's like it's directionally accurate. It's directionally accurate. But I don't think that we should be getting into a world where we're trying to teach our kids that doomsday is coming 8 years, 12 years from now, as AOC once said, but then said it was a joke. Yes, the modern religion of global warming is a joke, AOC. But this is creating a depression. We've had articles, we've had situations where people are getting depressed. Children are being depressed because they don't see a future. They're impressionable. They listen to the adults. They listen to the academics, the experts. And, there is no such thing as truly settled science. We get very close, but when you have experts saying, it's settled science, we are headed towards doomsday, what is a child going to do? Right? Are they going to say, nah, I think I'm going to continue watching Nickelodeon? Well, they might, if they're smart. But a lot of them are being persuaded in this direction that we really need to do something. And usually that something, unfortunately, involves governmental intervention, larger government, and a little thing that I like to call socialism. Yeah, raising taxes and saying, well, you can't do this. Authoritarianism. Okay, maybe not. Some might say socialism is not the greatest word for this, but they are trying to put socialism in. They're trying to raise your taxes and say, well, we need to build all this stuff, otherwise we're doomed. And meanwhile, the price of oil is a large indicator of how well the world economy is doing. And other countries aren't necessarily on board with our idea of what is morally or fiscally virtuous when it comes to climate. So, because youth crave agency but lack wisdom, this is all very convenient. Young people, many of them, I remember, they want to be like adults. They want to have importance. They want to have purpose and meaning, and they want to make a difference. They want to make a difference on the world, right? They want to make their mark. They want their existence to mean something. They crave agency. They want to make a change. They want to show their parents, show their friends, show their peers, show everybody else that they have done something good. And that's why virtue signaling is so popular among younger people, especially. They're not necessarily, aware of their moralistic tendencies, but they can still fall under the spell of a modern religion. And so they crave agency but lack the wisdom. They don't have the experience, the time on this earth to understand how much is truth and how much is fiction about these things. And so it's rather convenient. They're rather susceptible. And I say, of course, Try to get as much information as possible. Don't get bogged down by labels. Ask a lot of questions if you can. Questions are good. And, labeling people alarmist or denier, whatever it might be, I think most of us, I like to think in a positive direction, an optimistic direction, that most of us are looking out for the best. They're looking out for other people. They're looking to make a better world, and they're thinking ideally, idealistically, they're looking at the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and they're trying to avoid that. So I don't hold it against anybody if they believe one thing or another about this topic or any other. I have my bias and my preferences and my advocacy, which you can see on this channel, with new tweet videos every week or two, and then we have segments that are taken from the larger tweet video and made into more palatable forms. I do have my preferences, but I don't hold it against anybody if you disagree. I actually look forward to hearing your commentary below. And that's it for the video today.